Well, thank you very much for this kind invitation. It is such a pleasure being here today. And I have to tell you, every year when I come back and work with the teams here, it is absolutely fantastic. Thank you for this wonderful warm welcome. I know that we have a group of executives in the room with us who have limited time, so I'm going to just cover a few top-level topics initially to give you a perspective of really what Provoke talks about, what the culture of disruption is, and then we'll have a break at that point, and we'll come back and continue our process. So, as you heard about my introduction, my name is Linda Bernardi, and I am known out there as a provocateur. My role, my passion is to get engaged with large enterprises, work with them globally, including yourselves, to bring about disruption and increase the rate, intensity, and passion around innovation. A little bit about my background. My formal education is in mathematics. I have been with a think tank the initial 12 years of my career, BBN in Cambridge, where we solved very complex problems. And good, and not of her, so that a lot of you know about BBN. But really that was an opportunity to disrupt and innovate. And that's really where my personal journey began at BBN. And after that, in 2001, I started my company in Cambridge, Mass, Connectera, and our business was basically uprooting barcodes, disrupting the world of barcodes that you see on everything. That requires that you wand things. That's totally unnecessary if you replace them with radio frequency identification. The journey of 6 years building the company, building the products, the services, selling it to Oracle was an entire journey of not only disruption to innovation, but also how we go from vision to execution to changing the market when the market believes that it's not possible. And a lot of times when you're disrupting, people don't believe that it's possible. In fact, people think you're crazy. And that's great. If you have a great idea and you share it with somebody and you get feedback that says you're insane, then you absolutely know you're on the right track. Otherwise, we'd all be thinking the same. After that journey, I have been running Straterra Partners, which is a strategy consulting firm. And the last 5 years, I've been very engaged with large enterprises in this same process of how do we actively and intensely disrupt in order to innovate. And I'll share some of my experiences with you over the course of the next few days. So that's just a little bit about my background. And so I want to start out by reminding everybody that disruption is not chaos. Disruption is actually really necessary for innovation. I started using the term disrupt around 2001, which is when I had my company, and that created a lot of discomfort in people. And I loved that. I loved going into a meeting in a traditional company and saying, we're going to disrupt, we're going to change, and seeing those looks of despair, right? Because I can't think of any time in the history of technology or anything where innovation has happened without disruption. Think about it. Can you innovate if you don't disrupt? Can you lead in innovation if you don't disrupt? Can you be competitive if you don't disrupt, right? Yeah, you can have a product line that you can sell a lot of, but eventually can you remain competitive? So one example that I talk about in the book, and actually a company that I used to love a lot, was BlackBerry. I had 12 BlackBerries before I had to finally give it up. It wasn't because it wasn't a great product and didn't have a market and didn't have very loyal customers. It's because they refused the disruption. They refused to allow me, the consumer, the ability to have access to an app store, to download applications. There are many examples like this when companies refuse disruption that actually their survival is very much in jeopardy. And that's why we're here, why we're having the conversations here today. My logo, since actually 2001, has been Disrupt, Innovate, Lead. It's in everything that I've published. It's a real passionate belief that when we accept that we can disrupt, we'll actually begin to innovate and lead in innovation. I've also put in the links for my website as well as my blogs that talk about a lot of the components of disruption and innovation that I look forward to speaking with you in the course of our journey here together. Now, in a large enterprise, when you go to disrupt, I admit, yes, all of you are sitting there, your eyebrows are raised. It's not easy. There is fear of failure. There is risk. Risk is not accepted very well. There's no reward for risk, right? On your annual review, somebody's not going to say, hey, you tried 4 things failed, good job, right? And everybody wants that great ranking during the review. So how do we balance that? There is doubt, skepticism. In a startup, you go meet a customer, you think of something, you come back the next day with a prototype. In a big company, you meet with a customer, you come back, you get into the procedure. So how do we overcome the procedures, the processes, right? So maybe during this session, I just want you to open up your mind. Think about the possibility of doing things differently. In a large enterprise, you focus on perfection because things have to work really well for millions of customers. Whereas in disruption, you're more agile and you're thinking of just introducing things, testing things, experimenting with things. And it's bold, and it is visionary, and it is highly inspirational. And so these are all the difficulties that I want you to know that I know that you face when you think about disrupting in a big company. But that's even more the reason for us to think about how to do that. And over the course of this session and other, we're going to talk about how we can achieve them. Provoke. I wrote Provoke, honestly, in order to speed up the journey of working through the resistances so that we can disrupt and innovate a lot more actively together. And in fact, the tagline is why the global culture of disruption is the only hope for innovation. Let me wait a moment and talk to you about the culture, because culture is all of us. It is the people. But let me just say that the tagline was really intended to be very specific. I firmly believe that globally, unless we're willing to disrupt, try new things, we can't innovate at the rate that we have the capacity for, right? So that's really the essence of Provoke. And culture of disruption, culture is people. Culture are not processes, it's not procedure, it's all of us, right? So first of all, in the blog that I posted recently, you will see a discussion that I was having with a client that told me that the culture, they've got everything sorted out, they're innovating, they've got the steps required to build a culture, and as long as you go through steps 1 through X, then the culture is there. And the news flashes that it's not. Culture is about people. People are not processes, they're not procedures. In order to innovate, you have to open up the ability for people to be creative, to be innovative, to be free, and to be able to express their thoughts. And there's no way that you can fit all of that into a stepwise procedure. So very deliberately, when I was writing Provoke, I chose this trademark, culture of disruption, as well as culture of innovation. And you see that it's C of D. In fact, all of you, when you walked into this room, you received your official membership card of your culture of disruption. This is sort of your ACLU permission card, that every time you look at this, I want you to think about things you would do every day differently. And how might that feel, right? So it's a very deliberate thing. And notice that in the logo, there's this bursting effect on culture and disruption. Because once we allow this to happen, pretty amazing things are going to happen. So this was by no coincidence. The black bar on the bottom is actually the platform of the disruption. And it's the people. So culture is about people. It's about all of us. You'll see the role that you play in the ecosystem. And the first half of Provoke talks about the 5 stages of resistance that we need to go through before we can disrupt. Before we can create change, we have to walk through stages of resistance. And these are resistances in ourselves, yes, in ourselves, and in others. We tend to think ourselves as an individual that we might be perfect, that the problem is always with somebody else. Actually, the problem is a lot of times with ourselves and how we perceive things and how we resist toward change. So the stages are, and I'll go through them very quickly here. The first one is anger and denial. This is the very first stage anytime you take a radically new idea, typically, in a company, because it creates discomfort, it's too much outside of the product line. You will hear things like, you know, even if we do this, the revenue from this is so little, we're never going to get into this, right? Or no one in our business ever did that. Right, so I kind of think about cloud 5 years ago, right? I think about the big enterprise software companies that never, ever, ever believed anyone is ever going to run anything because security won't allow us to run it on the cloud. Okay, fast forward 5 years. Do I need to say more? No. I'll let you think about that. So that's stage 1. Stage 2 is rejection. That's the easiest way to cut the conversation. And you're going to learn a lot of skills on how to maneuver through this. How are you going to take somebody from anger and denial into rejection? Remember, you're entrepreneurs now, and rejection is one of the best things that are going to happen to your idea. When somebody says no, you know that you created a reaction. That's great. You're going to learn how to go back, work on it, and come back and turn that rejection, hopefully, soon into recognition. And recognition is when the company, management and others recognize, yes, including BlackBerry and others, that we need to make a change. Now, recognition needs to be genuine. This is why the culture, you'll find, is very, very important. Because a lot of times when recognition happens in my clients, it's immediately followed with this rush of going shopping, acquisition. Okay, I need to change. There's this great company of fantastic entrepreneurs. I'm going to build them, buy them, bring them in, and then suddenly my culture is going to change. And I'm going to change, and my products are going to change. And it never happens that way. There's an entire chapter dedicated to the acquisition delusion that I would encourage you to read and communicate with me on. But, and an acquisition is a fine way to recognize that there has to be change. But there's something even more fundamental, is how do we change the culture of the 90-some% in the company to allow us to get there. And hopefully, if we're past that point, we're on to inspiration and acceptance. And this is when the journey begins. So in order to disrupt, we have to walk ourselves and others through this process. You need to be patient. It takes time. Change is not easily done in big companies. But I will give you the most fantastic news is that in my entire career in tech, there's never been a time that change is more possible in companies, right? So I'm glad to see all these nods. That is fantastic. And this leads us obviously to the term that you're familiar with. It is the culture of disruption. It's all of us being part of this change, which is in the center of what is most importantly called the ecosystem of disruption. And when I was trademarking this, I also did ecosystem of innovation. Because when we create disruption and innovation, we don't do it alone. We do it in an ecosystem of partners, consumers, advocates, funders. And recognizing what that ecosystem needs to be is very, very important. So an example of Square, which allows us to do commerce now, anyone with an iPhone can do commerce, whether you're an Uber driver, or you're selling a product in the market, or anything you're doing, you can immediately do commerce. And that was a huge disruption to the old-time machines that you had to have an account and swipe the card to. But in order to do that, we needed to have the right smartphones. And in order to do that, we needed to have the right open source systems. And we needed so many things that had to play together. So in order to disrupt and innovate, we have to be mindful that there is such a thing as an ecosystem. In the ecosystem, and you see in the yellow circle around it, it starts with the leadership, CEO, the C-suite of the company, onto the board of directors, 10, 12 people, the investors, shareholders, the entrepreneurs that are involved, relationship with academia, which is super important in bringing innovation into a company, and then probably the two most important elements, the very most important one is you. You are the core of a company. You're the 99.9% of what makes the company. There's probably nothing more frustrating for me than when I sit with brilliant people who tell me, but I only work here. No, you are the reason here exists, right? So you need to celebrate that and become more powerful in being able to be part of this journey. Same thing with the market, recognizing that today's market isn't a market that one innovates and just introduces products. Today's market consumer is aware of their needs. They really do understand what they want. And they're very powerful through social media and others to make their wishes known. So the ecosystem of disruption, or if you'd like, the ecosystem of innovation, is the key for us to go from disruption into innovation, into impact. So I hope that this has sparked some thoughts in your mind. At this point, this is really all up to you. The question is, are you ready? Thank you very much for those of you who made the special journey here. We'll take a break and come back. Thank you very much for your time.